You're taking a look inside Kansas politics. Welcome in. I'm Rebecca Chung. Today we're taking a look at one of the most high-profile bills to make it through the legislature this session. It's a bill banning transgender athletes from women's sports. Still, new legal challenges could be coming with a federal rule drafted by President Biden's administration. Here to talk with us about that today is Attorney General Kris Kobach. Kris, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, let's start with the latest rule proposed by the U.S. Department of Education. Now, this plan would prevent states from enacting outright bans or blanket bans, but it would allow universities and K-12 schools to limit participation if they decide that including transgender athletes could undermine fairness in competition. Now, this could be looked at as a compromise, but what say you? What's your take on this?
You know, having looked at this rule carefully, I don't think it's going to be a compromise. I think it's going to be, it's ambiguous the way it's drafted. It starts out saying that, you know, essentially this is an infringement upon the rights of the transgender person to participate in the sport that they choose. But on the other hand, it also makes a concession that the fairness of competition is a legitimate educational interest. But it also says that the states have to demonstrate that there are legitimate educational reasons behind limiting sports to people of that biological sex, and also the state has to show that there is some effort has been made to limit the detrimental impact on a transgendered person. I think that as a practical matter, it's going to mean that the Department of Education is going to come after any state, and now there are many states that have said only biological girls can compete in girls' sports. So our sense is that it is going to be used to try to stop states like Kansas, but we'll see. We'll be ready and waiting at the Attorney General's office to step in if the Biden administration does try to stop this. And of course, we'll be ready to defend the Kansas law that was just passed by the legislature if any group on the left, such as maybe the ACLU, they've threatened to bring a lawsuit, and if they do, we will meet them in court, and I'm pretty confident we'll prevail.
Right. Now, fairness has been a major argument in this debate over transgender athletes participating in women's sports. If it's about fairness, though, is it fair to exclude transgender athletes from participating in sports based on how they identify? Now, this is what the U.S. Department of Education says. Categorically, barring transgender athletes in that way would be a violation of Title IX, which prohibits sex discrimination at institutions that receive federal funding. Do you agree? And what are your thoughts on the protections that Title IX currently provides and the potential for this new rule being put in place? Do you expect legal challenges with the state's new law going into effect?
So I think the Biden administration is completely twisting the meaning of Title IX. Title IX was enacted decades ago to create a realm of women's sports that is funded by the federal government. It's because of Title IX that we have such well-funded college athletic programs for women's sports. And the intent of Title IX, very clearly spelled out by Congress, was to create an area where women and girls could compete fairly against other females, and it was to create a sporting realm where there's fairness, where they wouldn't have to compete against males if they wanted to play this sport. And so I think the Biden administration is really twisting the words. And by the way, the federal statute doesn't say sexual identification, that makes no mention of transgender. It just refers to sex. And clearly the intent of Congress was if you are of the female sex, you can participate in these sports, and you can participate in a fair playing field, and you don't have to compete against men or boys. And so I think it's a stretch for the Biden administration to say sex also means sexual, you can't discriminate on sex, also means you can't discriminate based on sexual identification. So they're going to have multiple barriers there. They're also going to have some additional legal problems if push comes to shove and this goes to court.
Okay, now we've seen transgender issues appear to be increasingly in the spotlight when it comes to sports and politics. However, we're finding that the actual number of transgender athletes is small. Let's take a look at these numbers we got from KSHA, the State High School Activities Association. A spokesman for the association says that the group is aware of 12 transgender students out of more than 106,000 participating in athletic activities. 3 trans females were eligible to participate this year, but 2 of them are no longer participating and graduating this spring. So why do you think this issue continues to gain attention even with a small number of transgender athletes participating?
Well, because that small number of biological males competing in a girls' sporting event, typically they'll be performing at the top end and taking away the championships, taking away the trophies, taking away the scholarships. So even though you may have 10 12, whatever the number is, those individuals are highly likely to be, winning the events, like we saw with Leah Thomas in collegiate women's swimming this past year, shattering records, winning national championships. You could see things at the high school level where they're winning the local meet or winning the state championship, even though it's a fairly small number of people.
Now, when we come back, we're going to be taking a look at policies the state already has in place for transgender athletes. What could change under the state's new law? And if Biden's rule takes effect? We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
For more than 34 years, Shorey Automotive has proudly served the Topeka area with knowledgeable, reliable, and honest repair and service. We're honored to serve our veterans, active duty service members, and first responders. Shorey Automotive, providing you with value for your repair or service dollar.
Buying my glasses was so easy.
Success Vision has the fastest service in town.
I got 2 pairs of no-line bifocals for only $79.
There's a doctor right next door. I got to choose from hundreds of frames.
2 pair for as low as $39.
Great prices and 1-hour service keep me coming back.
Success Vision has it all.
2 pair for $39 in an hour for less. Come see us today, Success Vision Express.
It's time. The 2023 draft in Kansas City. The top picks in college football and the teams who want them. It's your preview of the players who could be called to the pros. Who will your team pick? Draft coverage starts Wednesday night at 6:30 with The Pick Is In, followed by Draft Day Preview Thursday night at 6:30 before the draft. All on KTKA 49 ABC. Draft coverage is sponsored by Kansas 811 and these fine sponsors.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Rebecca Chung, and I'm here with Attorney General Kris Kobach to talk about one of the laws going into effect this summer, a ban on transgender athletes participating in women's sports. Now, Kris, this is an issue with many layers, and one of those is a current policy that KSHSAA has in place regarding transgender athletes. So it's similar to what Biden administration has in place or is proposing. Let's take a look. Under KSHSAA's policy, schools are given the ability or choice to consider the following. First, a gender identity used for school registration records. Then you have medical documentation. This could be length and duration of hormonal treatments, sexual reassignment surgery, psychological counseling, or medical records. And then lastly, we have gender identity related to advantages to the student if participation would be approved. Now, the new Kansas law would take away the option for schools to decide, and instead transgender athletes would have to participate based on their biological sex determined at birth. Or another category would also be designated for co-ed or mixed. So this aspect, though, takes away local control. Why do you think schools shouldn't have the option to decide where transgender students participate? What if that decision schools make is also taking safety and fairness into account based on the factors that they would be recommended to consider?
Usually when we have local control, we do it because conditions vary from school to school, from city to city, from town to town. This is not one of those issues. The advantages that the biological male has in every sport are universal. And so the idea that, well, we can let some schools decide to let the biological males compete in the girls' sports and other schools not, that's based on the premise that there's something different. And, here, this is just a fundamental issue of science. And, you don't have to take my word for it. You can see all of the many athletes who've come forward and said, look, including Caitlyn Jenner, and said, this is not even a close call here. And if you look at the, records set in the various sports, and I say this as a father of 5 daughters. My girls are involved in sports and they invest so many hours training. Some of them are seeking scholarships in their various sports. The notion that they would lose that scholarship or lose that placing to a biological male who has unfair advantages in the sport, I just think it's irrational. And I think most Kansans, most Americans say, yeah, we have girls' sports for a reason, so the girls can have a level playing field competing against other girls.
Now, there are concerns about the changes that could come down from KSHSAA. While the bill doesn't specifically require or force genital inspections, some are worried that this could be the case if this is put in place. How would this law be enforced? Would genital exams need to be used, and what other methods could you see being put in place?
We don't know yet what the Kansas State High School Activities Association is going to do as they implement this. I would hope that would not be something that would be involved, but it's probably too early to say exactly, because they have yet to meet to say exactly how they're going to implement this.
Do you think that genital inspections would be one of those methods that could be considered?
Well, you know, a person's birth certificate should be sufficient. I mean, I wouldn't think that one would have to, you know, take that extreme measure.
Now that the federal rule is coming up, how could it impact some of the new changes that the state would make?
Well, we'll see. So the federal rule is proposed. At this stage, there's a comment period with any federal regulation, or as they're called, rule. Then the Biden administration would promulgate the final rule, which would probably be, you know, say 3 or 4 months from now. And then at that point, the Biden administration would have the ability to wield that rule, and we'll see if they start going after the 20 or so states that are trying to protect girls' sports and keep them fair, like Kansas is.
Okay, is there anything else that you'd like to add on this particular law?
You know, nothing other than I think it's, you know, we're on very strong legal ground here. And the Biden administration is trying to take something, Title IX, which was, you know, passed at a time when people were not talking about transgendered athletes. They were talking about creating a vibrant realm for women's sports, for girls' sports, and that has been accomplished. And I think it would be a real tragedy if we then have government entities attacking women's sports, making it less fair, allowing biological males to compete and take those scholarships away. I mean, it would undermine Title IX, not enforce Title IX.
All right, and after the break, we're taking a look at the other side of this issue. We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
New Sound is hosting a nationally known hearing aid expert. He will answer all hearing and tinnitus questions, offer free consultations and special discounts. We give you options because you deserve the best.
Find great authentic Mexican food at the Mexican Taco Shop. Our locations at 1901 Southwest 10th in Topeka and 419 West 6th in Junction City are always open. Dine in, drive through, or carry out. Or visit our 37th and Burlingame location. Open 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Quick lunches between 1 and 1:30, plus free coffee. 3 convenient locations, 2 in Topeka and 1 in Junction City. Take a short trip to Mexico at the Mexican Taco Shop.
My husband, who worked on a strip job for a number of years, got black lung. A little over 3 years ago, he quickly started declining, and it started asking for my help. Since Jerry got sick and I've taken on the extra work here, it's been wonderful to know that I can still hear the word, hear the message, and have some pastor that I feel connected to in my home with me.
Here at Performance Tire and Auto, we're more than tires, we're family. And because of that, we know how important it is to you to keep your family safe. For over 75 years, we've been a trusted name in automotive service, tires, and wheels in Topeka. You can always find us at either of our 2 locations, 1735 North Kansas Avenue or 17th and Topeka Boulevard. So stop in today and let our family keep your family on the road.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Rebecca Chung. We're continuing our conversation on a new law banning transgender athletes from women's sports. And joining me now is DC Heegert from the ACLU of Kansas. DC, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I wanted to start with this law. We know that it would prevent transgender athletes from participating in women's sports, but before we get into it, I want to recap what led up to this law going into effect. So first, Democratic Governor Laura Kelly vetoed the bill, but then there was an override in the House and Senate, a key vote coming from one Democrat in the House voting in favor of overriding the bill. When the governor was asked about this, she called the override disappointing. And Republican lawmakers, however, are singing a different tune. We got reaction from U.S. Senator Roger Marshall on his take on transgender athletes participating in women's sports. Take a listen.
I want to respect everyone's personal rights, but young ladies have rights as well. I think that it is just not right, it's not fair for biological boys to compete against girls. I think it is that simple. I don't think we want biological boys in girls' bathrooms and in locker rooms, that type of thing. I want to respect their rights to be who they are, but we can't impede on young ladies' rights as well.
DC, what are your thoughts on this law now going into effect and what both sides are saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Governor Kelly's statement that it's disappointing, the outcome of the veto override. And I think that, you know, I want to push back a little bit on the framing from the senator because, you know, he says it's that simple. But it really isn't, because he's saying that we need to respect young ladies' rights. Well, what about the young ladies who are trans that are now banned from playing sports with their peers? I think that it's important that we protect the rights of all Kansans, and that includes our young trans Kansans that are a vulnerable population that are facing attacks not only from the legislature related to their ability to play sports, but their ability to access health care they need and their ability to go to school and live as themselves day to day.
Now, this law could also include some changes to KSHA's current policies regarding transgender athletes. KSHA will be required to designate teams as male, female, or co-ed. Also, a key part will most likely be getting rid of that option that local schools have to decide where transgender athletes play. What are your thoughts on this aspect of local control going away?
Yeah, I think this is an overarching theme with the anti-trans legislation that we've seen introduced in the State House. I think they're all examples of legislators sort of getting involved where we don't need the government to get involved, because schools or athletic associations or other entities that are tasked with handling these policies for the communities that they represent, we're already doing this. KSHA has had their policy in place, and we haven't had any issues in Kansas thus far, and so it's frustrating that we've seen this bill be consistently brought up even though there's been no problems to attach it with in Kansas. And so it's disappointing to see that we've gotten to this point with it.
Now, I know that the crux of this debate has been about fairness. So one side's arguing that perhaps a biological advantage could put another student in danger. Then the other side is saying, is it fair to discriminate based on how someone identifies? What say you? Should transgender students be in a league of their own? Is that fair?
I don't think that the solution is to further other the trans students that are just trying to have the same opportunities that all other Kansas kids have to be a part of a team and play with their friends. If we look at the statistics, or KSHA has reported since this bill has passed that there was only 3 trans girls that were registered to be playing in KSHA governed sports. So how would we create leagues if there's not even enough trans athletes for them to have teams and compete? So that, just isn't really an effective solution. And then the other issue is that still doesn't get at the problem of this bill, is that it stigmatizes trans people, and it tells young trans kids in Kansas that you don't get to be yourself all the time, and that you're not fully welcome in this state. And then I do also just kind of want to circle back to that piece about fairness, because there's all sorts of biological differences. Even if we're just talking about cis women, I was a college athlete myself, and I'm 5'2". I was playing basketball against people who were much taller than me, people that were much stronger than me. There's all sorts of variation, and that's kind of the beauty of humanity. But that's also why when we try to make this black and white and really act like it's a very simple issue, it's not. And so that framing of fairness, I think to an extent can be insulting to female athletes who feel like they are great competitors and don't want their talents belittled just based off of what gender they were assigned at birth.
Now, KSHA will be meeting to address how they expect to enforce this law later this month. But a topic that's been floating around is the idea of genital inspection being used as a method of enforcement. KSHA currently requires physical screenings for all athletes, but there's nothing in the law that specifically requires or forces genital exams to be used. Despite that, we know that some organizations are saying that this will be the case. What do you think is setting off concerns about this? And is it fair to maybe speculate before any decisions are made by KSHA?
I think that, well, one, I want to flag that the lack of any regulatory guidelines or clear rules for enforcement in the bill is problematic, because it leads to the exact problem that we're talking about. How are we going to enforce it? It causes a lot of issues there. But I also just want to speak to, I do think that it's fair. I don't necessarily, I guess, to a certain extent, legislators have said that we'll avoid this with birth certificates, or we'll avoid this with the existing physical exams that were already in place. But that doesn't solve the entirety of the problem, because this bill applies to K through 12 and collegiate athletes. KSHA only governs 7th through high school. So how are we going to handle the elementary school kids that may be involved in this bill? How are we going to handle folks that don't register for school with a birth certificate because they may be from, they may be moved internationally and they don't have that documentation? So there's lots of issues there. So I think it's very fair for the public to be concerned about how they're going to implement this bill.
Now, we're also learning that the ACLU is one of the organizations that have threatened legal action over this law, according to Kobach. While I understand you can't comment on litigation and the impact of pending changes from Biden's administration under the Title IX rule, how do you navigate such a complex issue like this on the legal front?
It's too early for us to say, you know, specifically what's going to come with that rule. There's going to be public comment. There's going to be lots of procedural steps before that is a final guideline for Title IX. But we can say kind of broadly that the message that that sends, along with where the rest of the court litigation has gone in this space, is that any blanket bans on trans athletes from being able to participate as their gender is wrong. And that's what the notice of proposed rulemaking says. That's what the injunctions that we've received from courts in other states that have tried to pass similar laws. What that means overall, while we're navigating the moving kind of landscape that we're facing in policy and legal spaces, is that where the law is headed and where policy institutions are headed is toward protecting trans rights and protecting trans athletes' ability to play sports as themselves.
All right, and when we come back, could new challenges be coming as other bills are still up for debate? Will they become law? We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Doughboys Pizzeria, now with 2 locations in Topeka. Serving fresh pizza with our signature sauce, award-winning wings, awesome appetizers and desserts. With outdoor dining and entertainment. Call or order online at doughboys.pizza.
The story of Grace Med has always been told through its people, both those who serve and those who it is our honor to serve. We meet at the intersection of compassion and vulnerability, bringing health where there was illness and hope where there was despair. Our patients come to us bearing the weight of living in the margins, and we share the love of Jesus Christ with them by providing compassionate quality health care for all their physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. Because health restored is always hope renewed. Find hope today by scheduling an appointment with Grace Med.
You ready?
If you can keep up.
We're gonna do this?
Yeah, let's do it.
I got a job interview today. Congratulations.
Thank you.
At 2 Men and a Truck, we'll treat you and your belongings like we'd treat our own grandmas.
Here we go.
Welcome. Whether we're moving you across town or even across the country.
My son and I were crossing the street to get to school. The Ford F-150 ran the red light. My son continued to cross the street and was ran over. I was worried if he was going to survive.
Our experience with Devon James was phenomenal. We didn't have to deal with any hospital bills. We didn't have to deal with any insurance company. All of that was taken care of by Devon James. 100% happy with the result.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Rebecca Chung, joined by DC Heegert with the ACLU of Kansas. Now, DC, there are some other bills that could potentially be brought back to the floor if vetoed. So one bill would define biological sex as it pertains to bathrooms, locker rooms, and domestic violence centers. That one is likely to have a successful override with just 1 vote shy of the majority needed in the House. One Republican lawmaker was absent that day. The House took a vote. But we reached out to her and she said that she would have voted in favor of the bill if she was present. So that one likely to have a veto override. However, another one bans gender-affirming care for minors. This one is much less likely to muster up support, with more lawmakers split on the issue. What are your thoughts on both bills and some of this legislation that's been moving forward this year? What do you expect if they become law?
Yeah. I think that it's important to note that this is all, connected to each other, and it's been a very concerted effort, not only in Kansas, but across the country, to push legislation that limits trans people's rights, limits their ability to live their lives authentically in public spaces. And I think that there's a lot of rhetoric around, whether it's protecting women, protecting children, fairness, there's sort of all of these buzzwords that get thrown about, but when we look at the text of these bills, when we look at kind of the national groups that are backing these bills across the country, what it's really about is pushing trans folks out of public life, pushing us back into the closet, and really encouraging trans young folks to not come out, to not live public lives, because what their communities are telling them is that, you're not welcome here, your rights aren't respected here. And so that's really what these bills are about. And I think if we see these bills become law, it's only going to cause more harm in that sense. And I think it's important that we focus on that instead of getting lost in some of the rhetoric and the debate around various different issues that folks want to say what these bills are about, when really what they're about is attacking trans folks' ability to live public lives. The ACLU of Kansas, as well as our LGBTQ+ community partners, are working to ensure that if Governor Kelly does veto these bills, we're able to sustain that veto in the State House. As you said, that may require a little bit more work on other bills than, say, SB 26, the healthcare bill, but we're certainly not giving up that fight just yet.
And you said there were also some other bills that flew under the radar.
Yeah, for sure. So alongside SB 180, the bill creating a definition of sex, and SB 26, the bill that would ban minors' access to gender-affirming health care, there was also a bill that passed that would essentially take the two bills that would take the definition that was definition of sex that was included in SB 180 and apply it in one context to public schools and their policies for housing students on overnight school trips, and then another bill that takes that definition and would apply it to all of Kansas's county jails. And these are concerning for various different reasons. In the school context, it's just another bill that's telling trans students that they don't have the right to be safe and welcome in our schools, that they aren't respected in their place of education where they have to go every day. And when we're talking about the bill related to county jails, not only does this harm trans folks that may be housed in our county jails because they're going to be, housed in places that do not correspond with the gender that they're living their lives as, but it also would risk our state's access to federal funding for county jails. There's a national statute called PREA is the abbreviation, but it stands for the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And there's national standards from that law that every state's counties and jails have to comply with. And there's actually an explicit standard related to how to house trans inmates. And this bill that has passed, this is called SB 228, is in direct violation with that standard because it's a blanket ban on allowing trans folks to be housed under their gender, and that's in direct contradiction with the national standards that we're required to comply with to be able to receive federal funding. So there's lots of concerns related to those bills as well.
Okay. And that was your look inside Kansas politics. If you want to keep up to date with all things Kansas politics, then follow us on social media. Follow us on Twitter at @InKansasPolitics and on Facebook. Just search Inside Kansas Politics. We'll also post the full video on YouTube. Just search KSNT News and check ksnt.com/inside-kansas-politics for the past episodes. If you have a story you want Kansas state legislators to hear, let us know. We'll see you here same time, same place next week.